Welcome to this special edition of the Economy Magazine at I-24 News, where we take a look at the world markets and the global economy. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Well, coming up on today's show, the attacks on Paris taking the spotlight at the G20, upending the summit's usual economic focus, world leaders ranging from U.S. President Barack Obama to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, uniting now in a common front to battle IS. And the latest wave of terror on France's capital, a focal point for markets, as a nation and continent remain on guard following unprecedented attacks on Parisians. We speak with an economic analyst from France to assess what impact the latest events may have on the French economy. Well, first, let's start with the headlines. World markets across the board hurt by the attacks in Paris. Asian stocks endured a hard sell-off Monday, with airline operators and tourism-related bets among the most badly affected. Japan's Nikkei fell 1%, and the Hang Seng down almost 2%, though mainland China stocks somehow managed to rise 0.7%. In Europe, meanwhile, markets opened flat. By the afternoon, though, France's CAC was down 0.29%. Meanwhile, Germany's DAX was trading up 0.16%, and London's FTSE also up 0.39% by the afternoon. U.S. markets, meanwhile, seem primed for a negative open. Well, the Paris assault pushed national security now to the center of the U.S. presidential race. Last night, the Democratic debate opened with a moment of silence in honor of the some 130 killed and hundreds more wounded in Paris Friday night. During the first 35 minutes of that debate, candidates addressed terrorism, but soon after, they shifted their attention to domestic issues like health care.
We have to go after what's called the shadow banking industry, those hedge funds. Look at what happened in 2008. AIG, a big insurance company, Lehman Brothers, an investment bank, helped to bring our economy down.
Why, over her political career, has Wall Street been the major campaign contributor to Hillary Clinton?
Japan's economy slipped into recession for the second time since Prime Minister Shinzo Abe came into office 3 years ago. Government data now showed the world's #3 economy shrank 0.2% between July and September, the second quarterly fall in a row, which economists qualify as a technical recession. The result is yet another blow to the Prime Minister's Abenomics policy program of fiscal spending and monetary easing. Still, analysts expect Japan's economy to pick up in the coming quarters, a sentiment echoed by the country's economy minister. Let's listen.
Even if there are some weaknesses, businesses are having record results. The job market and salaries are improving, and so the economy is on its way to recovery.
And for the first time on Monday, U.S. warplanes struck hundreds of trucks that IS had been using to smuggle crude oil, which it has been producing in Syria. According to an initial assessment, 116 trucks were destroyed in an area controlled by IS near the eastern border with Iraq. Oil is deemed a key revenue source for the terror group. To disrupt that source of cash flow, last week, American officials said Washington had sharply stepped up airstrikes against infrastructure that allows the Islamic State to pump oil in Syria. Well, the assault on Paris upending the economic focus of the G20 summit in Antalya, Turkey, with greater attention now towards terrorism as well as immigration. Here's the story.
Last Friday, just hours after French officials announced tightened border controls in advance of global climate talks set for Paris, violent extremists attacked the City of Light, killing 129 and injuring hundreds more. The tragedy came just before G20 leaders were set to meet in Antalya, Turkey, on Sunday. In the wake of the attacks, French President François Hollande decided to skip the summit as he called for 3 days of national mourning.
Les familles sont dans le chagrin, la détresse.
Families are in sorrow and distress. The country is in pain. I've declared 3 days of national mourning.
Pour proclamer le deuil national pour 3 jours.
Among the issues at the heavily guarded 2-day G20 meeting were adopting an OECD package on tax avoidance and climate change. But with Paris still fresh on everyone's minds, much of the focus was on terrorism, tightening borders, and policy in the Middle East. Syria in particular, a conflict that has left 250,000 dead and which rages on just a few hundred miles from the summit.
We will be discussing terrorism at this summit. I will stress to world leaders that our response needs to be robust, but always within the rule of law and with respect for human rights. Otherwise, we will only fan the fire we are trying to put out.
On the table, according to Bloomberg, are discussions to cut off funding for terror organizations, structures that a December 2009 cable published by WikiLeaks, signed by then-Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, details as being heavily rooted in oil-rich Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And while cutting off funding is one side of the financial coin, stabilization also requires heavy investment in war-torn places such as Syria.
I urge G20 leaders to heed the growing global call for a recovery plan for the region, perhaps akin to the Marshall Plan in scale.
With the G20 coming to a close, Paris, still picking up the pieces after the devastation, continues to prepare for the upcoming climate talks known as COP21, set for early December. No doubt security will be tight as the Paris talks will include leaders from around the world aiming to work out the economic and environmental needs in stemming greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, for further analysis now, the G20 summit in Turkey, we are joined by independent correspondent Laura Wells based in Istanbul. Thanks again for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Hollande canceled his visit to the G20 conference in Turkey due to the terrorist attacks in Paris. Tell us now how the remaining members have reacted to his absence.
Well, certainly the Paris attacks have pervaded almost every speech in the G20. And though it is basically an economic group of the top 20 nations by GDP in the world, certainly terrorism has also dominated every message. And they've also released a statement on the fight against terrorism. The country said that they will continue to cooperate and are in solidarity. So this has definitely influenced this G20. It's as much about the economy as it is about the fight against terrorism.
Right. As you mentioned, the G20 seemed to be reinvigorated here and tackled that issue of terrorism with a vengeance. Do you think this was directly impacted by the bombings in Paris?
Absolutely. When they released the statement on the fight against terrorism, within the first paragraph, they talk about condemning the Paris attacks. And then they go on to say that they are going to come together to try to cut off the sources of the terrorists, financial sources. And this is a really big issue because it's been going on for a very long time. Just within the past 24 hours, the United States has bombed 116 fuel trucks believed to be ISIS's in eastern Syria. And that's obviously one of their main revenue sources at this time. But even Hillary Clinton, who is the former Secretary of State in the United States, she said on Saturday in the debate that Turkey and the Gulf countries need to make up their minds. They need to tell the United States and other countries whether they're actually serious about tackling this extremist jihadism or not.
Well, that's an excellent point that you bring up here with Turkey. What other steps, though, did the leaders vow to do to ramp up this effort?
Well, aside from trying to cut off the financial sources, which I think is crucial at this point, they said that they were going to share more information and that they would be working together in the future going forward in a much closer fashion, including sharing information and intelligence. This is certainly an ongoing issue, the fight against ISIS, but there's another issue also. It's not the only extremist group in Syria and Iraq. Certainly there's Al-Qaeda. So they can come together to fight terrorism. Right now the focus is ISIS. But if ISIS is hit considerably, they will also have to take on other terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda, which has flourished in places like Yemen since the Saudis have started bombing that country in March.
Well, thank you as ever for joining us for analysis live from Istanbul, Laura Wells. Moving on now, the French economy returned to growth in the third quarter as low prices and borrowing costs encourage consumers to spend and businesses to invest. But what ramifications might have this assault over the weekend on Paris have for Europe's second largest economy? Daniel Roth has more.
Coffee shop terraces are empty, the Galeries Lafayette shutters are closed, and so are the main tourist attractions. The true Parisian symbol, the Eiffel Tower, won't be open for visits until further notice. Since last Friday's bloody attacks, the French capital is in a state of shock.
Everything is closed today in Paris. We can't go shopping. We can't walk around. But Paris is very empty, and unfortunately, life has stopped a bit.
But life in slow motion won't be without consequences on the French economy. Torn between sadness and insecurity, the French population doesn't have the heart to go out, consume, or even invest. And the shop owners who opened their businesses this weekend barely sold anything. Street markets have even been forbidden by law.
Non, ce matin, c'est pas comme d'habitude. On a vu le...
Things aren't as usual. When I arrived this morning at 5 o'clock, the fisherman was preparing his stand, but when I came back later, everyone had left. It's the first time I see the square so empty.
C'est la première fois que je vois cette place aussi vide.
Like this market, many other public places have had to stay closed, and among them, a great number of cultural sites, from museums to auditoriums, including also some cinemas and even amusement parks. For the tourists in the capital, these holidays have a bitter taste.
Like we were going to, but we saw that everything is closed here, so we don't know what to do. And it's funny because today is our first day. Yesterday we arrived, and we know already what happened, and we are so sorry.
A lower number of tourists visiting the French capital is to be anticipated in the following weeks. Several travel agencies have already offered their consumers to postpone or cancel their trips to Paris. After the attacks at the beginning of this year, the Parisian hotel's attendance rate dropped 9% between the 8th and 18th of January. Yet the hotel industry represents alone 7% of the GDP per capita. And as the revenues seem to be about to decrease, the expenses, on their part, should increase, and on the security front in particular.
Les armées ont dégagé 1000 militaires supplémentaires.
1,000 additional soldiers have been deployed, mostly in Ile-de-France, and will be patrolling in Paris during the next days, as the president has indicated.
In the USA, the losses caused by September 11, 2001 have been estimated at $80 billion. In other words, less than 1% of the country's GDP per capita at the time. The losses were limited by the government, who didn't hesitate to stimulate the economy to give consumption a boost. Like the USA, France is a major economic world power. Terrorism's consequences on its growth should be overcome in due course.
And for a closer look now at France's economy in light of these attacks on Friday night, we are joined on set by Lionel Friedfeld, an economic analyst from France who resides in the Tel Aviv area. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Well, tell us, in the wake of this terror attack that we saw on Friday night and the following day on Saturday, authorities told residents there to avoid the streets. What impact has that had on business?
Actually, impact on business could be seen in a short term. You know, you have retail stores, restaurants. Obviously, people are not going to go there anymore for a couple of days, but basically a drop in the turnover or sales of the companies. And you have also impact on medium term for company. You mentioned tourism. Tourism is more than 7.5% of the French GDP. Obviously, Paris is attracting a lot of tourists, and the rest of France also. And the tourists will not come for a few months. So the French authority have to bring back security. And when I mean security, also a feeling of security for tourists to be back to France.
Interesting point here with the tourism sector getting a serious hit. But what other sectors of the economy are likely to get hit here?
What is interesting, you've got different sectors, which are going to be hit. But interestingly enough, you're also going to have industries like the defense, homeland security, and defense industry, which is also going to benefit from what happened in Paris. Because if we take an example of MBDA, which is the largest manufacturing of missiles, and know that is actually using in Syria, the whole defense industry is going to do using a lot of weapons to fight against ISIS in Syria and in Iraq. And if you just take it back to the French territory itself, company like Safran, which is one of the leaders in homeland security solution, will provide solution to secure schools, to secure all kind of, I would say, national, building.
Right. Well, fascinating point here that some areas of the economy are likely to, in fact, benefit from this. And, of course, we see this here in Israel with cyber security being a hot sector. Tell us also a bit how this is going to impact France's interest in investing in northern Africa. Will this approach here be applied to Syria?
Investment towards North Africa, I think France, because they had a very strong relationship with Morocco, with Tunisia, with Algeria, I think will not change in terms of general, like policy. Because basically what's happening there, you've got large French state-owned state company like Alstom, like Veolia getting, some large contracts. So I don't think this will have an impact. French corporation knows to make the distinction in between, terrorist people in Syria and in Iraq and North Africa.
Indeed, a lot of complexity here. Well, thank you as ever for joining us for this insight on the French economy. That wraps up our special coverage today. Stay tuned here every day for all your global economic coverage. I'm Natalie Ehrlich, live from the Jaffa Port in Tel Aviv. Thanks as ever for watching.